Well, hello everyone. My name is Laurie Smith, and this is April Child Abuse Prevention and Awareness Month. This is the whole month, the month that down in the states that they actually have devoted to child abuse prevention awareness. So I'm going to broadcast every single day for the month of April. So that's my input. Um, I usually do broadcast in April every year that goes around since I started doing this, and just add my voice to everyone else's out there. I'm basically just a child abuse prevention public speaker because I'm a survivor of abuse, and so um, you know that's what I would say I mainly do. Just volunteering with groups, different not for profits, through the years, and so I've looked into this stuff a lot. Just from growing up abused, I mean, I have the whole background of what it is to be abused, and in a domestic violence situation as well, with my parents as a secondhand victim. And so I just have a lot of experience with abuse, unfortunately. And no child should ever have to go through that. No person should ever have to go through that. That's why we have human rights. That's why we have child rights, right? And so that's what we're looking at tonight, child rights. And I'm not an expert at child rights. I just know what I've learned from the different websites that put the information out. But I know what it is to be abused, and what it is to not have these rights. Growing up abused, so I have firsthand knowledge of what it's like. For these children who are being abused or neglected or mistreated in any way, shape, or form, um, and that their rights are being taken away from them. And so their very right to life, many times. I mean, children are killed, murdered, or they die from the abuse. So, I'm not an expert at at the laws and the whole statutes and stuff, but I am an expert in the fact that I've lived and survived child abuse and lived through it. So, many children don't. That's why I use my voice to, um, with to add with everybody else's out there to say, well, look, this is a real problem, and it still is today. It's still going on, and when are we going to, as a society, as a world, when are we going to honor and cherish children and change the way we feel about children? Like I was saying on last night's show, children are not, put here on the earth. They're not on the earth to abuse, to exploit, to take advantage of in any way, shape, or form. Human beings aren't, but people have been doing this for since time began, unfortunately. So I just thought we'd look tonight at child rights. We're going to go through. I'm doing 30 shows, a total of 30 shows. So we're going to cover all sorts of topics. Child physical abuse, child sexual abuse, child neglect, all that sort of stuff. It's all going to every night I'll cover a certain topic. So tonight is child rights, and I'm just looking at some websites. I did pop the info into the show page. So I'm only just looking at two websites because we don't have that much time to cover all this stuff. But I just looked and I typed into my browser, when did child rights start? And they said the convention is the most rapidly and widely ratified treaty in history. And here are the key details. The convention lays out children's rights in 54 articles. It was adopted by the United Nations in 1989. That's almost 1990. You know what I'm saying? It's only been 30 years since the UN, United Nations, actually accepted this body of of child rights, that they say this is it. This is the rights that a child should have. And most countries have adopted it. I'm sure there's some that haven't. Um, not all countries go along with this, but for the most part, most countries recognize that these are the rights that children have, and they're just basic rights. The right to life. I mean, that's the basic right. That's the most important, obviously, the right to life. So that it's not okay to kill children. It's not okay to murder children, and there's just so many more. So we're going to look at a few because I know we won't have time to cover like all of them. There's a lot there. So 54. So I doubt we'll be able to cover 54 in an hour. I'm going to pick out some of the ones that I can talk about and really expound upon in my own knowledge base. So, and what breaks my heart, because I'm, as a survivor of abuse, I'd like to think that I would have advocated for children whether I was abused or not. I've always been a person who cares about people, and to, to know that so many people are suffering around the world, um, you know, whether it's an adult or a child, it just breaks my heart. So, I'd like to think that I would have done this regardless of whether I was abused or not. Coming from abuse, it gives me a bit of I would say, expert knowledge of what it is to be abused, and to not have these rights that these children um, are afforded, right, in every country that upholds them. Which there's, like I said, I don't know. There's probably a list of which countries actually don't, but we're not going to get into that. There's a whole lot that do. The Convention on the Rights of the Child. So there's information on UNICEF, and it's www.unicef-irc.org, and you can just check it out there. It's the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and then there's this other article there. I posted these. These are on the show page. There's another one called Children First Canada, and this is uh, 12 rights, 12 child rights everyone should know. So that's the one we're really going to focus on because it's the simple sort of list out of the 54, but we'll take a look at some of the others too. And so that's what we're doing tonight. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining me. This is so important to me. If I had time and money, I would have gotten into probably government, and tried to work to change and to make the changes that are necessary to protect children. I know that there's a lot of good people out there doing great work. There's also a lot of people out there hurting children and not doing good work. So, there's this horrible situation going on where even countries that are trying to protect children still are not doing a great job. And, children running, for instance, we were talking about Ukraine last night, children running because they have to, they're fleeing from war, all sorts of situations like that. And then they end up in these other countries as refugees, and then they're abused there by the very agencies that are supposed to be looking after them. There's a big problem, obviously, going on here on the earth, right? People are running for help, and they end up right in the hands of another government and agencies that are actually mistreating them and not doing the right thing by them. So it's really a horrific situation. It's good to actually look at this stuff. I know it's hard. Most people are like, oh, whatever, it's not my problem. For me, I figured, I've only got so much time left with my life, and I'm getting up there in age, so I don't know how long I'm going to be here. And I figure I really have nothing better to do than to be a voice for those children, men, women, and children around the world whose voices have been silenced, and for all those children out there today who have no voice. There's many of us speaking out, many advocates and you know groups doing great work to try to change this for children. And it's so important that we all do whatever we can in our own circles, in our own life, because not all of us are lawmakers and we can't all, be child advocates, right? But the issue is you can look out for the children in your life. You can make sure that the children in your life, whether they're your own children or children in your immediate family, make sure they're not being abused, right? You can make sure that your children's playmates are not being abused, your children's friends. Um, you can get involved in all sorts of activity like, um, you know, different things in your own city or town, to help stop and prevent child abuse. There's all sorts of stuff you can do. So it's kind of like just getting involved wherever you can, doing whatever you can. And I just think it's really important because these children, they're counting on us to be their voice. They need someone to change this mess for them, right? There's so many children today who are going to die, and there's not going to be help for them. And there's children tomorrow that are going to die. I mean, it's just going to go on and on and on. But hopefully, because things are since 1989. I mean, a lot more was done before that, but not a whole lot. But through the years, there have been groups of people and certain individuals who have been very powerful and been able to change the way that society feels about children and help people to think about the issues. What are these issues, and how can we become informed, and how can we make these changes to protect children, right? It's just so important. And so we're going to look at, first of all, this is the easy list here, the 12 the 12 rights, 12 child rights everyone should know, from Children First Canada. And I'm not reading the whole thing because I'm not going to read their whole website. You can check that out on the link. Number one is non-discrimination. So they said every child deserves equal treatment, regardless of their gender, identity, sex, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, religion, physical appearance, ability, socioeconomic status, nationality, creed, ideology, or other personal identities. Children with disabilities have the right to receive the accommodations they need to thrive, and refugees should also receive help and maintain the same rights as children born in the country they now live in. Children from minority, disenfranchised, and indigenous communities have the right to practice their religion, language, culture, and customs. That's just so important because we see a lot of problems in the world today with these types of issues where these rights are not afforded to these children. And and I mean, it's been going on since time began. You know, I mean, you know, every child matters. You know, it doesn't matter where they're born, what their religion is, what their culture is. Every child matters. And we need to, as a world group, as a world people, we're all living this world experience together right now. We need to figure this out. You know what I mean? It's a real problem. It's a real problem. It's been a problem for a long, long time. You know, people, um, you know, certain groups, whether it be the church or whether it be other institutions, whether they're government or not, who have, abused children, and because their culture was different than theirs, you know. And we're not just picking on one particular church or one particular institution, because this has been going on since time began. So we can pick on them all because they've all been guilty. There's not one that's not hasn't been guilty of this. Um, we just need to wake up and sort of make some progress here. After so many thousands of years, right? It's crazy. Number two, family. Every child has the right to live with their family. The family can be of any structure, but the family should instill a sense of belonging and provide a loving and nurturing environment. Children and youth deserve to feel an attachment to their caregivers, whoever their caregivers might be. Children should not be separated from their parents unless one or both parents are abusive or neglectful, or their home environment is unsafe. Children whose parents do not live together should remain in contact with both parents unless contact harms the child. If a child lives in a different country from the parents, the child and parents must be allowed to travel so they can be together. This is so important, and this is what the issue is. I mean, children have the right to family. And it's all, and we're not talking perfect, there's no such thing on this planet perfect. The issue is they have a right to be treated lovingly, and it says, nurturing environment, right? Um, People don't think about this kind of stuff. I think, most people don't think about this sort of thing as being a right that a child actually has. They have the right to a loving home, no matter who the caregivers are. They have a right to a nurturing environment. And, so many children grow up in homes that are not, there's no love, right? There's no nurturing going on. That's how I grew up. And so, you know, that's a right that was taken away from me, you know. Um, and children need a sense of, a family should instill a sense of belonging in a child. I mean, I was the last of seven children that were born. So my mom had three more children that were born stillborn. So there would have been 10 of us. So, but I'm the last of seven. So um, we all grew up in this unloving, unnurturing, abusive environment. All of my siblings did. So it wasn't just me. And I was just the last one born. But that's just how my parents lived their life, and that's just how we had to just deal with it. Children and youth deserve to feel an attachment to their caregivers, whomever their caregivers might be. And as far as parental, divorces and children parental alienation, which you see, I see many posts. Parental alienation is abuse, and in a way it really is, because it's the parents one's unless the child is being separated from that other parent because that other parent is abusive, or has the potential to abuse that child, or to remove that child uh, from from their custody. Let's say one parent was granted custody of that child, and then the other parent doesn't like that, so they'll kidnap the child basically and take off with them. This does happen, and a lot of times it's from because they know the other person will abuse them, or they suspect that they will. It's a real problem. It's a real mess. It's not okay for people to abuse children. It never has been. It never will be. I always say it. I figure I may as well just keep saying it, because it's just the truth, right? It's like there's no excuse for this stuff. There's no excuse. I mean, people, have children, and it's kind of like life gets in the way. So who pays the price? The child does. Because these two adults, whoever they were, that came together to produce that child, can't figure out how to do life. And so that child suffers. And that's really kind of the way it is for a lot of children. Um, you know, it's really disheartening and heartbreaking, because the children, shouldn't be kept away from the other parent, whoever it was or is, unless there's some issue where, like they said, they should remain in contact with both parents unless contact harms the child. So, if the other person is abusive, then of course you have to keep them away from that abusive parent, whoever it is. Um, so it's such a huge issue. And who pays the price? Always the children. You know, it's really heartbreaking, the stuff that we see out there that's going on, and it's heartbreaking for the families. It's just heartbreaking for everybody, but it's especially heartbreaking for the children. So because they're the ones that are going to pay the price for it. So it's terrible. Three, health. Every child has the right to be alive. So that's the right to life. Young people deserve the best possible health care, nutritious food, clothing, clean water, electricity, and safe housing. Children should learn good health and hygiene habits in their schools and homes. Children should have their mental, psychological, emotional, and physical health checked regularly, especially if they're away from home. Governments also have a responsibility to help families who cannot afford health expenses. Um, and just the right to be alive, the right to life. And that's kind of why I'm such you know a big proponent, like a big shout out, always, that children have the right to life, because so many people just think that they don't. You know, there's people that just think that children just absolutely don't have the right to life, and they do. And it's just we need to uphold these rights. We need to know what these rights are, and we need to uphold them. This needs to be part of everyone's education, because there's young people who are, you know, teenagers and early 20s, young people going out there starting families that have no clue that their children actually have the right to life, and they kill them. And it's like, okay, what gives you the right to kill your child, or any child? No one has the right to kill a child. It's not okay. And it breaks my heart because I see the headlines. I don't pass by them. I remember these little children, and I try to remember. I can't remember them all, of course. But the thing, who could, who could? There's so many. It's just horrific. The issue is these stories that you see, these headlines, and it's so heartbreaking because somebody really messed up. When a child ends up in the morgue in a body bag due to abuse, or just flat outright murdered, something went really wrong there. You know what I mean? Somebody screwed up. And a lot of times people, they just don't have the ability to start a family. They don't have what it takes to be a parent, you know. and to do the right thing. If a person's going to, if a person, like anybody, I'm not just picking on young people because my parents were older and they abused me. So it's not just young people, but I'm just saying anybody, has a child and you can't do the right thing by that child or your children, then you need to get them to somebody who can, you know, because it'd be better off those children. I mean, I thought about that too because I was almost removed from my home a couple of times actually, and I didn't want to be removed from my home. I wanted my mom. I didn't care so much about my dad. I really didn't. I never had a relationship with him, and he was always in the house. But he was. There was just no relationship whatsoever. My mom, I didn't have a relationship with either. It was just horrible. But I loved my mom, and I really wanted a relationship with her. Even as a little kid, I remember, just wanting her to love me, wanting her to take care of me, and just wanting her to be my mom and just love me. And she couldn't do it. She couldn't do that for me. Um, she couldn't do that for any of her children. So I just remember being this little girl, just, I didn't want to be removed from my home. I just wanted my mom to do the right thing and, stop abusing me, right? So a lot of times children, of course they want to remain with their parents or whoever the caregivers are. But the thing is you have to do the right thing by the child. If that child's going to continue to be abused or, possibly killed, you need to get that child to safety. So foster care would even be better than that. Even though abuse does happen in foster care situations, we know this. Children are killed in foster care situations. So it's not the be all and end all answer to the whole thing. Because I thought about it. People said, "Well, wouldn't you have rather just gone to foster care?" Not necessarily, because I knew kids. I knew two kids who had gone to foster care and had been abused. So when I was growing up, so I knew a lot of children who were abused actually in my neighborhood, and you know that was in the 70s before all this child rights stuff came around. It's kind of like, I'm sort of pre-child rights. So it's like, a lot of people were abusing their children back then. They're still doing it today. And it's just horrific. So children are being killed, murdered, and they have the right to life. So what's unfortunate is a lot of times these people will, you see it in the headlines. They'll have killed their child, and then they go to court, and the court just slaps them on the wrist and says, you shouldn't have done that. That's wrong. You shouldn't kill your child. Puts them in jail for a couple of years. They get out for time served and good behavior, and then they're pregnant again before you know it, as if they're female, and and then they're having more children and they're killing them too. It's like, well, isn't this nice? You know what I mean? Like, where, you know, what's it going to take? I mean, I've heard people say stuff like, well, we should just have a registry, and anybody that's going to have a child has to take these courses and they have to pass them. And I mean, they do a lot of that. They actually do a lot of, um, you know, parenting classes and stuff like that especially for first time, parents and stuff. But the thing is like, it doesn't seem to help because children are still ending up in the morgue, right? They're still ending up in the body bags. I just, it breaks my heart, because I know when I was growing up abused, my mom used to say, "I have the right to kill you." And she was beating on me. She'd be like, "I can kill you. It's my right." And I'm just like, "Don't kill me, mommy." I was little. I was really little. And then I got older, and I was like, "Go ahead and kill me. I don't care, man. You've already done it. You may as well just finish off the job, you know." But that's when I got older and didn't care anymore. But when I was really little, I mean, of course, that was scary to me. Being beaten and my mom telling me she could kill me if she wanted to, or that she should kill me. Um, but, that's terrible. And am I glad she didn't kill me? Like, yeah, I am. I'm glad to be here. To be a voice for children who were killed and murdered. This is terrible, just absolutely terrible. And so children do have the right to life, just so everybody knows that, right? It's a basic right. You know, but the world forgets about that. And they kill their children. Oh, well, just sad. And they go on, they talk about in that same thing, children have the right to life, but they also have the right to health care, nutritious food, clothing, clean water, electricity, safe housing. And that's a real problem for a lot of children. A lot of children, especially in certain countries that just don't have the ability to provide, that sort of stuff for their children, and everybody's living in a poverty situation. Um, but they're loved. The children are loved and they're wanted and they're cared about. They just don't have a lot of food or money, or maybe they don't have running water or electricity. There's many people living without that on the planet today. Is that abuse? In my book, it's just kind of like, if a parent is doing the very best they can to provide for their children, then to me, that's just not abuse. You know what I mean? Like, I grew up kind of poor, but not poverty level. We were just right at the poverty level, $5 over or something. I think it was $10 over or something. So I grew up right at the poverty level, and it didn't bother me. I didn't care that our family didn't have the greatest house and the best cars on the block, sort of thing. It wasn't, that wasn't really my concern. I was actually concerned about being killed. So I was like, that was much more, much more, in my brain. It wasn't concerned about, the fact that my parents weren't wealthy. But they didn't starve us, so we weren't starved. We actually got to eat, and you know, I just, I never really held that against my parents. Not having all this extra money, or you know, they couldn't buy me a lot of things. Um, that's not what I wanted. I just wanted their love and care. So I think that's what's mainly important to children. Um, Children growing up in a situation where the whole community is at poverty level or below, serious poverty going on. They're all growing up the same in that community, so they probably don't even consider that to be an issue. And if the children are being looked after and they're being cared for, and the caregivers love them, um, and they're not abusing them, then the children at least know that they're loved. They may be going to bed hungry, but all the children in the area are probably going to bed hungry, right? That's the world problem with poverty, right? And that's a whole different subject that we're not even getting into here. This is to deal with child abuse and the rights of the child, right? So I think it's just, parents should, whoever the caregivers are, should do the best they can to provide for a child, and that includes health care. You know, like, we were never taken to the doctor, and that's because my parents were brought up on abuse charges. So my parents did not want to take us to the doctor with anything going on, because they were already busted on child abuse charges. So lots of times I probably should have been taken in, um, and my other siblings too. So you know, children, that's just sad, but that's a lot of the case, and that's why a lot of children die from the abuse, right? They they're abused, and maybe they're not murdered right out, right? Not right at that moment, but the abuse, the injuries inflicted, then causes them to die within a few days, right? So the parents didn't do, whoever these caregivers were, didn't do the right thing by getting that child, you know, that they abused, to the hospital, right? Um, this is heartbreaking. It's just tragic, right? Every time I see a headline, I really try not to skip over it on purpose, because I'm like, that child deserves for me to read this. You know what I mean? And not just pass over it and just be like, oh, another child abuse headline. There's just too many. You know, the it's just like the number of children that are killed and murdered each year. By somebody who should have been doing the right thing by them, and taking care of them, loving them, providing the best that they can for them, and they're just killed. You know, just terrible. Protection from harm. That's number 4. Every child deserves freedom from abuse, and children should be free from harmful work, drugs, sexual abuse, human trafficking, corporal punishment, emotional, psychological abuse, harmful detention, war, any other forms of exploitation. So children have the right to seek legal and medical help if they get hurt or abused. They should be free to make complaints about abuse to a third party, and abusers of children should receive prosecution to the fullest extent of the law. Yeah, I like that. That's right. That's absolutely right. Fullest extent of. Uh, Stirring them up. Every child deserves freedom from abuse. That's exactly right. And children should be free from harmful work, drugs, sexual abuse. So you shouldn't be, a child should never be, have to be in an environment where there's, drugs laying around the house. You know what I mean? Or people that are high, like on drugs, who could potentially hurt them. Um, it's not okay, right? But so many children grow up with this, and it's just part of the family, it's part of the life. That's the scene, and free from abuse, and that's my big thing, and that's obviously what I focus on is child abuse prevention. But you know, so many people think that they say, well, I was disciplined and I was beaten and it didn't do me any harm. And I'm like, well, then maybe you just weren't abused. You might have been just disciplined. Um, Abuse, there's a total difference between abuse and discipline. And discipline is not abuse, and abuse is not discipline. They're two totally different things. Like, you just can't compare them, but a lot of people do. And it's kind of like, abuse is where a child is injured. We're not talking somewhere some form of punishment that doesn't hurt or harm a child really, but it just lets the child know that they've messed up, that they need to that there's consequences to their actions, right? um, and discipline, I got discipline. I remember being disciplined as a child, and I didn't like it, but it didn't damage me because it wasn't abuse. Right? Abuse is what damaged me. And so there is a difference between discipline and abuse. And abuse is anything that hurts or harms a child. So it's such a serious issue. We're not talking about a little spanking, or a little parent having to get after the child, and the child wants to stick their a fork into some sort of electrical outlet or something, or stick their tongue in there or something, and the parent's like, no, you know what I mean? That's not abuse. That's saving the child from possible death. Um, it's there's a whole difference between a discipline and abuse, and discipline is necessary, and abuse is not. Um, Parents lashing out at their children, and they're angry, taking it out on their children for the fact that they're angry. Um, that can just quickly turn into abuse because it's rage on a child's body. And I mean, I grew up abused physically, so I know what this is all about. So it's kind of like, I can tell. I've talked and talked about abuse. Anybody just go back and listen to my 1,500 videos there or audios, right? Um, just talking about abuse and what it is. Children are battered and beaten, and bones broken, internal injuries, you know, and these people that these police officers and investigators that come and have to look at these children's bodies, and report everything. Then they end up in the morgue and body bag. And these people at the morgues, their hearts are probably just broken because of the stuff that they have to see. These little children just coming in, just completely annihilated. You know what I mean? And it just breaks my heart because there's no excuse for abuse ever, ever. You know, some of these cases are so tragic. Just looking at them, it just breaks your heart. Like if you have any heart at all, it's like, then it's going to be broken when you see that because you're just like, oh my God, how could somebody do that to a child? I don't know, but they do it every day around the world, every single day. And it's like, you know, where's where's the conscience of these people? Where's the law? You know, we need tougher penalties for people who do that sort of thing to children. And not just a slap on the wrist and okay, a couple of years and then get off for a good time. You know, people that have the capability to kill a baby and sexually abuse babies and kill them and do these horrible things to their bodies. Like to me, and children, young children, older children, those people, locked away for life, and then taxpayer money has to pay for that. I think, execution. Just get them off the planet. They shouldn't be here. Anybody that could do that to a child or to any creature, any animal, to any human being, tells me that person is very evil and needs to be off the planet. That's how I feel about it. Does that mean that I would want my parents to be killed and murdered? No, because it. I think it has to. I think it should really come down to intent. You know, my parents were very, very uh, stressed out individuals. Let's just put it that way. My parents had lots of friends. They both of them had their separate friends and some together, but they were just very stressed out, high strung people who couldn't cope, and so they just took their frustration out on each other and on their children. It wasn't intent. It wasn't an intent to actually, you know, I mean, my mom would rage and stuff like that and say she didn't want any of us, but actually she was just hurting so bad. You know what I mean? But I'm talking, I've seen some of these cases where these children, for instance, just that little case, I can't remember her name, but the one in New Mexico where that little baby, three people were responsible for that baby's death. And she was a little toddler and just a baby, just a small child, not like a 2 week old. I mean, she was like just maybe not even quite a toddler, 1 year old, 1.5 years old. They beat and burned this child. They raped this child, this little baby, and they killed her. Brianna, that was her name years ago. The case Brianna, and that just when I saw that, that just broke my heart because I thought, how evil and sick and twisted can a person or can people be to do something like that to a child? And I thought, don't waste time on taxpayers' money on these three individuals that were found guilty of killing that little baby. Just take them out and shoot them. That's what I say. Because there's no way, there's no excuse for that. There's no excuse for that. And that little baby girl, her life was taken away from her. How many children go through this? Many of them survive, and then they turn into that. You know what I mean? It's like then because they're so full of anger and so full of rage and so full of what happened to them. That's kind of what happened to my mom. My mom was abused as a child. It's not an excuse. There's no excuse for abuse, but the issue is she was just a broken person. There's so many broken people out there having children and then breaking their children and turning them into monsters like themselves. Right? It's a cycle of abuse. Right? So this needs to change. Right? It really does. I'm so thankful for the groups out here that are actually working to stop this mess. And I just like to add my voice in there as a survivor because I know, what it's like to be in this situation for a lot of this stuff. Identity is the next one up. Children must be registered when they're born. The national government must recognize a child's name and national identity, and children must be informed of their identity. Children have a right to receive, access, and transmit documents of their own identity, and official records should include their name, place, and date of birth, family relations. Um, if documentation gets destroyed or if a child's national identity is otherwise compromised, the government must assist the child in getting their identity back. They even have the right to their own identity. Education. They have the right to education. They're talking about primary education should be free. Secondary education should be accessible to every child. Education should prepare children to participate as active citizens, teaching them about responsibility and a sense of community. So every child deserves education. They have the right to it. And so many children, I mean, how many we don't know, but there's a lot of children who are handicapped or the parents think there's something wrong with their child, and so they keep them down to the basement, chained to beds, or chained on the floor or whatever, and they just keep these children there until they starve and die. This has been I've seen several cases of this within the last 2 or 3 years. Um, just not just in Canada, but in the States and elsewhere. And they just that child's deprived of everything. You know what I mean? Like they might spend 12 years down in the basement tied up because the parents think there's something wrong with them when there's actually nothing wrong with the child at all. So they're deprived of education, they're deprived of life, right? And then they finally die. And the parents are like, well, the government's like, the court system, oh, well, you probably shouldn't have done that, right? Maybe it wasn't a good idea. They don't throw the book at these people when they're brought in. It's like my parents, when my parents were brought in, they were busted on child abuse charges. And this was years ago when I was really little. I mean, I don't even remember that part of it. I was about probably 1 year old or something. I was just a baby. So, I don't remember that part. I do remember social workers coming around. But my parents, when they went to court, I mean, the court should have thrown the book at them and said, you guys, you need to straighten up, or, they should have removed us from the home. Absolutely. Until my parents could pull it together, get their counseling, get their own counseling, get marital counseling, and then, maybe they could separate for a while, get their situation straightened out, decide if they want to come back together as husband and wife, and then figure out whether they can actually look after all these children, right? I mean, a lot of the children were older. So my siblings, three of my siblings, um, actually there was two that were moved out when I was born. They already moved out, so they were 18 and 17 when I was born, so or 16. So that left five of us in the home. So the courts could have said, look, can you raise five children? Are you capable? That's you're just abusing them, right? That's no good. They left us in the home, you know, and the social workers came around and checked on us for a couple of years. I do remember that, and then they signed off, and then we moved to Canada. We were just out of the system, and you know whatever. Then we moved back to the States, and we were just completely out of the system. Um, the abuse just continued on. But the courts, my mom was trying to tell the courts that it was all her, our dad that was abusing all the children, and the older teens and the older children that had moved out already said, no, it's both of our parents, it's our mom and our dad. So they were both busted, but nothing happened. It's kind of like, you need counseling and you need to stop beating on your children. You know, you need to stop threatening their lives and stop threatening to kill them, and killing yourself. Because that was always the issue. Is my dad was it's familicide. My dad was always talking about killing us and killing himself. So, and my mom was like worried that he would kill us. You know what I mean? And then she wanted to kill me because she was like she had a real hate on for me. I don't know why. I was just a cute little kid. I thought I was really cute. Like if you see my pictures on my website, I do post all that stuff on my website. Born in Hell, and I just thought I was really kind of cute. You know what I mean? I thought, who could hate that child, right? But my mom did, and it's because I was born out of rape. My dad was forcing himself on her, and she did not want any more children after. I mean, who knows how many children back she didn't want any more children, and she was stuck with more, and she did not want us. So it's a shame. But the thing is, a lot of these children. I got to go to school. You know what I mean? Actually, I had to go to school. It was a good idea to get out of the house for a while, away from my mom. But a lot of children are deprived of education. They're deprived of friends. They're not allowed to have friends. Um, they're just, you know, they're just so mistreated. There's so many. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Just from the survivors that I know, and their personal stories of pain and what they went through. It's just horrific, right? So it's just not okay that people should think that children don't have these rights. You know, they do. Children have the right to freedom of thought. They have the right to speak, express, and share what they learn, think, and feel. They may use any means of creative expression available to them unless their expression somehow harms others. The children can determine their thoughts, means of expression, opinions, socio-political ideologies, and religious and spiritual beliefs, provided that their thoughts do not infringe upon the rights of others. And parents should teach children to express themselves and respect the opinions of others. Children have the right to join or create groups and organizations. That's just who even thinks about this stuff, but it's true. They have the right to meet with others and advocate for change as long as they do not harm others. And children have the right to give their opinions on issues that affect them. Adults should take the concerns and opinions of children seriously. And yeah, I mean, like when I was growing, most children, I think, especially coming from homes where there's a lot of domestic violence and problems, their opinions really just don't count. It's kind of like the needs of the child don't matter. It's kind of like that's how I grew up. That's why I went public with my stuff, because I wanted people to know what it's like to grow up in a home where you can't say anything, because if you do, you get a beating, right? It's kind of like, even if I needed something, if I needed something for school, or I wanted to go do something, it was always a possibility that I'd be beaten just for saying that I needed something. It was all about my mom's needs, you know. That's why my mom abused me, because it was like, it's about my needs, not your needs. You know what I mean? And I have the right to kill you. And I was just like, after a while, I'm like, go ahead. You know what I mean? You've already killed me, so go ahead, finish it off. Um, it's just sad that people don't realize that children have the right to speak and express and share their feelings and their opinions. Then when they get older, they don't know how to do it. How to do it properly, and how to respect other people's feelings and other people's opinions. And that's why we have so many problems on the earth. I think people just don't know that we should be able to openly express how we're feeling. Children should be allowed to do that just as well as adults should be allowed to do that. As long as we're being respectful and we're not hurting anybody, we should be allowed to express ourselves. That's what the whole human existence is really all about. And, we're all unique, so it's going to be all a little different, but that's why we have to be respectful. Right? We're not all the same. We're not carbon copy, cookie cutters, little beings coming, together. We're all different with different opinions, different ideas, right? And we need to be respectful of each other, right? Especially other people's feelings and thoughts. Most people don't feel. I know in the old days, there was that old saying, like especially early 1900s, late 1800s, where children should be seen but not heard. So, in other words, children, you could see a child around, but they weren't allowed to open their mouth and say anything. And that's how my parents grew up. I'm absolutely sure of it. Like my grandparents were born in right at the 1900s or late 1800s. So that's my grandparents. So my parents were born in the 20s, so 1920s. So there was a whole lot of that. Children had no, like, they couldn't even express themselves. They weren't allowed to be heard. They didn't have a voice. So that whole generation then, which is most people's grandparents and my parents' age, but people my age, most people's grandparents. The kids today would be like their great grandparents, their great great grandparents. They really were shut down as children. They weren't allowed to speak. They weren't allowed to say anything about how they were being treated, um, or add anything to the family, because they were supposed to be seen and not heard. And there was a lot of abuse in those days of children, because that's just how that particular group of people thought that's just what you do to children. You just beat on them. You can do whatever you want to them, and you can kill them. My grandmother killed one of her sons. My uncle, he was a teenager, and she beat him up and then made him sleep in the barn, and he died of pneumonia. So she was responsible for his death, is what it is. And they just buried him, no problem. Like, this was probably in the 30s, 1930s. And, there was nothing done, nothing said. It's kind of like, oh, he died of pneumonia, but there was nothing, no one brought up the question that it was my grandmother's fault, because she's the one that had done that to her son. That's my mom's mom. So my mom was abused horrifically by this woman, and this horrible woman that I don't really call my grandmother, because I had no love for her whatsoever. And you know, that's just how my mom grew up, right? And so then my mom had children and really didn't know how to deal with with her own issues, and then raising a family, and then being abused by this man. So she was abused as a child, and then ended up in this abusive relationship with this man, my dad. And it's just, she was just like, what do you do? I mean? This is life. And and so this is what she told us, this is life. This is just how it is. If you don't like it, I'm going to beat you some more. It's kind of like, okay, I'm not saying nothing, man. Yeah, so it's pretty sad that it's taken so many years for people to realize that children have the right to life. They have the right to express their opinions, and they have the right to get their needs met. Right? They have the right to access to information. Number 8, children have the right to transmit and receive information through the internet, radio, phone, television. I mean, a lot of this just came around recently, right? I didn't grow up with a lot of books and other resources. Adults should ensure that the information children are transmitting and receiving is not harmful. However, they should encourage and teach ways to access and critically process information. And so that's kind of interesting because that's new. Oh, I didn't have the internet and cell phones and all this back when I was growing up. Um, Privacy. Every child deserves privacy. The law must protect children's privacy in all areas, including online. Personal documentation of children should not be published. A child's family, home, personal communications, and reputation should be protected. And victims of abuse should not have their names, faces, or information published. That says these children. That's why you don't see, especially in Canada, you don't see a lot of abuse related stories. And if you do, you never know the victim's name and you never see a picture. Whereas down in the States, they do tend to post some of that stuff. But in Canada, they don't. Um, you know, and that's to protect the child because the child does not, this child victim of abuse doesn't have, the ability to make that decision carefully, whether they would in any future date want that information out there. And these little 2-year-olds, being abused and removed from their homes, or maybe they survived, right? Hopefully, thank God. Um, you know, whether they would want as an older teen, you know, coming of age, um, to make that decision. At that point, they could make that decision whether they wanted that information out there. But a small child doesn't have that capability, so we have to protect those children. That's why that's very important. For me, coming out as an adult, that's my choice, right? Um, but for somebody else to do that, could injure the child, right? Maybe that child would grow up to be an adult and say, a young adult, and be like, "Oh, I don't want that information out there. No way. I wouldn't want that information out there, right?" Whereas other people like me are like, "I'm putting it out there, man." But I didn't do that till the age of 42. Um, you know, uh, I didn't used to tell very many people what was going on in my home. Very few people knew anything about the abuse, really, except for a few neighbors who happened to kind of see some stuff, knew that the social workers were involved, CPS, and so there was, a few people knew. But my parents had a lot of friends. They had a lot of support, and the children did not, and that's why, you know, I I went into such great length and detail in my books to actually show how a family situation like that, how that happens. Um, the children don't have support, but the adults do. And that's just the problem because adults don't have relationships with other children, with other people's children. So, if a parent's saying, you know, oh, my wife this or my wife that, and the wife is telling her friends, my husband is just this and he's doing that, but they're not concerned about the children. And if you're in this situation and you know a family that's doing that, and you see bruises on a child, you see welts, um, you know, cuts and burns. Maybe a child is leery of even showing, you know, their face, trying to hide things. You know what I mean? Then you know that there's more than likely some abuse going on there, and that's a lot of times the parents. Of course, they're going to have friends. Abusers have friends. A lot of times that's the case. Abusers are not all these monsters that we think would be running around that you'd be able to say, oh, that person's a child abuser. These are people living right next to you. They're living right next to me in our neighborhoods, and they that's for some reason make the wrong choice and the wrong decision to abuse their child or somebody else's child. So they're and a lot of times they're very popular in the community. There's a lot of that sort of thing going on, especially with CCA child sexual abuse. Um, child sexual predators. A lot of times are people who are doctors, lawyers, people, officials, government officials, people who are up there where you wouldn't suspect that sort of thing from somebody like that. And they're they're the worst culprits. They're hard to spot, so they don't all, look like these people you should stay away from with these, overcoats on, looking suspicious on the corner. There is that too, but that's very rare. It's mostly people that want to take your kids on a camping trip, or they like to they're grooming your children. Let's take them. We'll talk more about that with child exploitation and child sex trafficking and stuff like that. We did a show on child sex trafficking, but I'm going to do one on child sexual abuse, and we'll sort of cover some of that stuff at that point. But the issue is abusers just don't have a certain look. Abusers are just regular people who make the wrong choice on behalf of a child, and they could be anybody, right? As we can see and tell and know by what's been going on over the years in the news of who's abusing children. Sometimes it's teachers, sometimes it's parents, sometimes it's institutions, and I mean, sometimes it's strangers, right? So it's really anybody has a potential to abuse a child. That's why you have to really watch one-on-one interaction between adults and children, and somebody's got to be paying attention, right? And that's just that's just the way it is. That's the nature of the whole thing, because there are a lot of really um, you know sick and twisted individuals out there who just want to get a hold of children and do whatever they're going to do to them, you know, sexual abuse and whatnot. So you have to know who your children are around. You have to know who your children's teachers are, who their coaches are, who's interacting with your children. Because abuse happens where the child is. Wherever that child is, that's where the abuse is taking place, right? So it's just so important. So, number 10, the arts. Every child has a right to engage in cultural and creative activities. This is a right. People don't think about this stuff. Children should be free from art designed to traumatize, provoke, or disturb them. However, they should receive access to and be allowed to create art that is controversial or unpopular without fear of censorship. Number 11, reparation. If a child is victimized, traumatized, displaced, separated from their parents, or otherwise subject to harm, they should receive reparation and rehabilitation. Children have the right to receive help after enduring any type of pain, trauma, or neglect so they can regain their health, dignity, and identity. Every child has the right to receive legal help and fair treatment. Governments should provide money and resources to assist children from poor and disenfranchised communities. And yeah, that's just so important. And so many children don't get any help, and that's the problem, right? That's a huge problem for society today. And you just we won't even tackle that here because I don't really have time to get into it. But that's, you know, the statistics are out there on the problems of, children that don't receive help, coming from abuse, what that costs society, not just money wise, but in every other way. And it's absolutely horrific. And no child should ever have to be, abused, and then not receive help. But this is what's going on, right? And there are some children that do get help, thank God. You know what I mean? And thank God for these groups and advocacy groups and not for profits and all sorts of things that work with children who have been abused, and work to restore their dignity and their identity, self worth, and to help to heal, that sort of thing. I didn't start my healing journey till the age of 42, right after I was going to kill myself for the last time. So I had been planning my suicide for a long time. And I didn't start my healing journey till, you know, actually, really the bulk of it till I was 44. So a lot of times it happens later in life, you know, and it's a shame. I wish I would have got help a long time ago. I have said that before. As a young adult, I should have gotten help, in my 20s. And I think that would have made a huge difference in my life. It's unfortunate that it just didn't happen until the age of 40, 44, right? But whenever it starts, and whenever if you're a survivor of abuse, whenever you start, that's probably the right time. You know what I mean? You realize, get to a certain point where you realize that you absolutely do need help, and can't, you don't want to go any further without getting some help. And I just think it's really important. It doesn't matter how old you are, you can start your healing journey at any age, right? Number 12, government responsibility. Governments must do everything possible to ensure that children enjoy all their inalienable rights and develop in a safe and free society. Government should prioritize child rights when considering any major policy. And so, they said if the laws of a country protect child rights better than the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, those laws take higher priority. And government should make active efforts to inform children about their rights. That's right. you know, I mean, children have rights, and this whole idea that children don't have the right to life is just pathetic. And for anybody to think that's just the case is really misguided. Um, it's so important for people to realize. And so abuse, that's taking that right away from them. The children have the right to not be abused. They have the right to be loved and nurtured and cared for. And a lot of us survivors did not get that. And so that's why we're fighting so hard to, to be one more voice, for these children out here today who sadly, there's no time to help them, right? So many children will die tonight, like I said. So we have to do all we can, like now, right? With with it, with what we have, and keep it going and keep it going. And that's why I keep talking, because the more people out here talking about this, the better. Um, because that way it doesn't get shoved back under the carpet, hidden behind closed doors, behind the window curtains being drawn, where abuse is silent and it's, devastating, but nobody knows about it, right? And so nobody's talking about it. So that means nothing's getting done, right? And so that's why I'm like, hey, I'm talking. I'm talking about this stuff. It doesn't make me uncomfortable. Abuse made me really uncomfortable as a child, being burned and abused and sexually abused and, just assaulted and beaten and verbally abused and stuff like that. That really made me uncomfortable. But talking about abuse doesn't make me uncomfortable. And we all need to talk about it because children are dying, right? So have a wonderful night, everybody. Tomorrow night we're going to talk about missing children. That's right, and because that all plays into child abuse. There's this whole thing where people, the myth that missing children are just children who ran away from home because they didn't like the rules at home. That's many times what people will say, especially parents who have had children actually, that they had some problems with as teens. Maybe they ran off or something. They just didn't want the rules, they didn't want to deal with the rules. That's a portion of these children, but that's not all of these children, right? There's a lot of children that are missing, that are kidnapped, taken off, into child sex rings, and some of them are just kidnapped by other people and, abused and killed. There's all sorts of horrible stuff going on. But these missing children, they're out there somewhere, right? And so we'll pick up that tomorrow night. And thank you for being here. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. I really appreciate all the support I've received over the years. People, just leaving such kind, um, you know, words of encouragement that really, they mean a lot to me. Those kind words, I didn't get very many kind words growing up, so those kind words they stay with me. Right? Thank you all. God bless you all. We'll talk to you tomorrow night.